Morning, everyone. Welcome to Warehouse Technology Group. Hope you found some of the stands interesting this morning already. The theme, as you'll have picked up from your the flyer and introduction and invitation to today's seminar, really focuses on sort of nightmares and this afternoon more the dream side of warehousing, if that's particularly possible to have a dream warehouse. What I'm going to cover this morning are some of the typical pitfalls around running warehouses in today's modern challenges, particularly around the retail and distributor world. Take you through some of the things that we commonly see, and then move on to how you can manage projects when you are managing change within a warehouse to start avoiding some of those nightmares. This afternoon, as Alan says, is the more important presentation, because this is obviously unimportant, where they'll take you through some examples of what some of the WTG partners' equipment and kit will do to help improve your warehouse. So without further ado, I'll crack on. So, competition has never been so fierce, particularly in retail, and more it's less around the product that your business sells and more about how you deliver it to your customer, whether it's on time, in full, whether it's been bespoked, particularly for a particular customer type. The focus is very much more on the warehouse than ever before. And the type of warehouse that you run and how you run it is becoming increasingly important. Interestingly, a study that was done a few years ago by the University of Western Ontario monitored publicly listed businesses who had to formally announce supply chain problems to their shareholders. They did this over a 10-year period and tracked 861 different businesses who had to announce supply chain problems. Without fail, every single one of those 861 businesses who were publicly listed, so you could track the share value, lost 20% of share value in the subsequent 12 months, which is a massive value depreciation on those businesses, and just starts to bring into focus how important logistics and supply chain are. Crucially, that report also noted that it didn't really matter what the cause of the problem was. So it didn't really matter if within your business the problem occurred in your warehouse, or if it occurred in one of your suppliers' warehouses that was critical to your business. So the importance in terms of managing your end-to-end supply chain has become even more greater, and the challenges are harder as things become more fast-paced. Black Friday, something we've adopted from our friends across the Atlantic. If you're a retailer, I don't know if it's absolute nirvana for massive sales before Christmas. If you're running a warehouse or a supply chain, it's probably your biggest nightmare of the year. Massive demand. I think it was up something like 600 or 700% on a day-by-day, even compared to a Christmas peak for many retailers. Massively difficult to staff up to. Massively difficult to maintain your delivery promise when you've got those sorts of increases in performance, because you're actually just beyond the capacity of your warehouse. And what I think we saw last year with many retailers sort of pushing out those delivery promises. So if you're buying on Black Friday, we're not going to be able to do next day. We're probably not going to even be able to do the day after that, but it probably will be within the next 7 days. I'm sure most of you can remember when you used to send off for special gifts off the back of a Weetabix packet. The standard text on the bottom of those was, please allow 28 days for delivery, which would have been a nice world for us still to be in. But as you can see, how much it's moved in the last, 30 years maybe, through to many people offering same-day delivery, particularly around things like industrial parts. So if you've got a plumbing business at the moment, you're now able to get same-day delivery. You place your order in the morning, they'll deliver it to your house that night. So businesses are really becoming much more sophisticated to fulfill customer requirements within very short periods of time. As a result, it's even more important that your warehouse is fit for purpose for whatever your business strategy is. So you need to be making sure that you understand, what the challenges are in terms of what's the business promise, and then is your warehouse getting the necessary funding and support to be able to fulfill that promise. What I'm going to do now is just walk through sort of 5 or 6 of the most commonly seen challenges. Nice picture of a warehouse being flooded in the background. and just to talk about some of the challenges that I think you're facing, and from a couple of conversations I've had this morning, I know this resonates with quite a few of you. One of the big challenges at the moment, particularly in retail, in running a warehouse, is how do you cope with conventional retail fulfillment, fulfilling deliveries to your branches and your stores, and picking large volumes, small quantity, small orders for e-commerce fulfillment. In addition to that, an overlay of complexity is many businesses also supply through third parties. So although you might have a retail outlet, you might also supply through Amazon. And we'll come on to some of the more specific things that people like, organizations like that, demand of you. One of the key challenges when you are running a warehouse that is doing both is actually how do you set those pick faces up. A typical retail operation will be much more around full pallets, half pallets, spread out over long distances, because you're visiting pick faces reasonably regularly, but when you are visiting them, you're picking multiple quantities, so you tend to be picking 4 or 5 to do maybe a weekly replen to a retail store. Under e-commerce, as I'm sure many of you are aware, that then changes dramatically, because you're then picking large volumes of small orders, maybe just one item from one pick slot, and that absolutely murders your efficiency in terms of the amount of travel distance that your pickers are having to do. And it's times like that when maybe you start to looking at maybe not necessarily automation, but how can you use belts and consolidation of picking orders, trolleys, and starting to be smarter in terms of the way you organize your processes and your equipment to maintain the same level of picking efficiency that you were maybe getting under a more conventional retail fulfillment operation. Moving on to sort of the customization requirement. Certainly in e-commerce, there's much more options for customers and consumers to be able to specify exactly how they want something delivered. So the pressure on the warehouse is to deliver a retail type service in terms of high quality, depending on particularly on the brand, and do that sort of customization at the point of packing. So if I look to businesses such as Burberry, who have a very specific training program for their packers, because everything's done by a ribbon. The ribbon's got to be cut at precisely 45 degrees, so that when the item's presented to the customer and they open the outer box, the experience that they should be receiving is exactly the same one as they should have got if they'd gone face-to-face in store. So we're having to pick up, from a warehouse point of view, we have to pick up the sophistication of high street retail and be able to build that in an industrialized way to sophisticated processes in the warehouse. Again, making much more complication. So the challenge really is then how do you get multiple orders coming to a pick desk, be able to understand what level of customization is required, whether it needs packing in a certain way, whether it needs to be labeled in a certain way, and labeling's an interesting one. Dealing with Amazon, they will be very specific about the label type that you need to do, and quite often we've worked with clients who have had to go into their WMS and reconfigure label printing just for that one customer, and then be able to identify when an order comes through for that customer, a different type of label prints off and automatically gone on. And how you engineer the packing process to remove the element of thought from the packer as much as possible to make sure you get a high level of compliance with what you want to happen is a massive challenge. The other thing that's proving to be a challenge, particularly around space, is range proliferation. So a number of businesses are actually being forced into increasing their range to try and chase those sales. In many instances, certainly in clients that we work with, that enormous tail of products generally does not deliver the sort of value and a level of profitability that people typically hope it will. And to be able to go into your tail and really look at both the volume, the gross profit and the net profit that's generated from those items, and then be able to play that through your cost base within the warehouse, I think the business, you as warehouse owners maybe not be so surprised, but the business will tend to be surprised about how many of those are actually negatively impacting the total net profit of the business. And the way you can demonstrate that is really around being able to do that analysis to get the net profit of the item, then talk about the cost consumption of the space that it's taking up and the cost of picking it, and building that into sort of a net profit model to be able to say, this is lunacy. I've got a warehouse that looks like that, and actually the old 80-20 rule, 80% of my volume's coming from 20% of lines. What can we do about the tail, and how do we share that knowledge with the rest of the business to make sure that we're making the right ranging decisions that isn't putting additional unnecessary cost into warehousing. In terms of productivity, as we get busier, a lot of the good practice that we know should be done tends to slip by. So, quick show of hands, how many people who run warehouses have looked at where they locate all their fastest moving product lines in the last 6 months and done a review of how that movement has changed? Hands up, anyone who's done it? Okay, 5 or 6. It's easy to forget. It's one of those things you go, yeah, I must do that. And it slips by, and before you know it, 2 years have passed before you've managed to do that review. Quick example here on the slide, if you can see it. But 5 of this was a warehouse that was doing its dispatches by postcode zone, and 5 of the top 6 postcode zones that they'd mapped were right at the back of the warehouse with the most amount of travel. We're seeing this more and more often, where the fastest moving lines, you get new range in, all right, we'll just stick it over there and I'll come round to sorting out where it should be in a couple of weeks. And that couple of weeks becomes a couple of months, and before you know it, it's a couple of years, and a lot of your productivity is being wasted away. What you'll see among some of the partners here is some of the different storage types about how you can manage to condense all those ranges in the most appropriate way, and start looking at how you segment the flow rates of your product range to be able to right size the pick face and place it in the right location within your warehouse. Automation. Automation, I always think, is a tricky one when you're looking at a warehouse in terms of how automated should it be. It tends to be very difficult to evaluate the long-term returns. You can do the numbers and work out what the benefit should be, but when you compare that to the costs, which are generally very well known, and the benefits are always a social experiment, really, in terms of what you can achieve in many times, and also the potential risks involved in putting automation in, which are largely well publicised, and I'll come on to. It's very difficult to be very comfortable to go to the business and put a good case forward for automation. Part of the challenge of that is that generally, if you've been running a manual warehouse, you tend not to have the knowledge of or the understanding of what is the best use of automation and what is appropriate for your site. So if one of the main things is you need to remain flexible and you've got large variety in terms of the cubic size of your product, automation is going to be more difficult. Not impossible, but it is going to be more difficult if you're, I don't know, if you're in maybe footwear and you've got sort of regular box sizes and things like that that you're able to manage more easily, then it is a bit easier. Similarly, putting all your eggs in one basket and running a fully automated system does have its risks. I think I'm probably telling you anything you don't know, but 10 years ago, Sainsbury's had a massive problem. They launched sort of 4 or 5 fulfillment centres which were going to be fully automated and bring in stock and break those pallets down, all feed it around a carousel, which would then allocate those cases to different stores. And basically, it didn't work. They wrote off £260 million of cost within their IT infrastructure, a lot more cost in terms of taking kit out and not making it work. So the fear of it going wrong is a very real fear, I think, from a warehouse management point of view. It can lead to wasted time, disturbances to core business, and reputational loss. One of the key challenges when you're managing change like that, and I'll come on to this in a bit more detail later, is people get caught up on going live on certain dates because that's what's in the plan. And one of the key things is actually just make the plan fit the problem. And don't get hung up on, we've got to go live on the 1st of October because that's what we've been telling everyone. I'm not saying that Sainsbury's tried to rush it in, but do you think we'd be still talking? I'd be still talking about it here 10 years on if they'd just put it back 6 months and it had been a success. People forget about things being delivered slightly late. They don't forget about massive catastrophes and disasters. Warehouse management system implementations. Quite often, if you're not particularly automated in terms of a WMS system, WMS in your warehouse, it's seen as being the panacea, or we put a WMS in it, everything will be fixed. Effectively, as I'm sure many of you know, primary process is to control the flow of tasks coming in and the control of the people and management of those people within the warehouse to make it easier to manage and drive more efficient productivity and drive down travel time. I was amazed a few weeks ago when I met a client who'd already selected a warehouse management system. They'd only met one provider. They'd not been to see that system in action anywhere. They were really pleased it was only going to cost £18,000, which sort of raised an eyebrow from me, knowing that they tend to be about 10 times that much, at least. And lo and behold, it didn't. That plan didn't quite work out well. But it was being run by finance, and tend not to like finance running. I hope there's no accountants, maybe not. Tend not to like finance running warehouse management projects, but these types of projects are still out there, and I'm not suggesting any of you are at that level of primacy in terms of working out what to do, but it's all about diligence and understanding what are the functions that you need. Start out with a detailed spec of what is it you're trying to, what's the business objective that you're trying to get out of that system. How are you going to make sure that it works in the way that you want it to and deliver the benefits? So not all WMSs are the same, but you don't always need the one that's all the bells and whistles. It's around picking the one that does the right functionality for you. The other thing that WMSs tend to provide is sort of that control over stock, which if you don't have one, you'll know all about the problems of not being able to control stock and understand where it is. It's a big benefit, but again, that's got to be right. You've got to have your product information, you've got to have dimensions, weights, all that sort of thing. If you overlook anything on that sort of implementation, it generally leads to major problems at the point where you go live. And I'll talk about managing go lives later. But it's really about the level of diligence that you put into managing any of those projects at any point in time. You can't leave anything to chance, and you really need to be sort of testing it all, both with yourself and involving as wide a body of people as possible, particularly operators, supervisors, and the wider group of the business to understand not just how you operate now, but how will you need to operate in the future, and therefore how does that WMS fulfill those needs both now and in the future. So common things we come across are no engagement from operators, selecting a system that isn't fit for purpose, choosing to go live big bang, and you have fine, we'll just flick a switch and we'll start working in a different way on Monday. You will start working in a different way on Monday, but it probably won't be the way you intended. And even not having a project plan. I'm astounded at how many people don't have detailed project plans of what should be happening on each week and each day leading up to a go live. It's absolutely terrifying from my point of view because I've seen too many things that go wrong. But it's too often there's a laissez-faire way of going about it, going, yeah, we know roughly that we're going to go live in the third week, and we know we need to do these things, but don't worry, I've got it covered. Believe me, if you've not got a detailed plan, you absolutely haven't got it covered. Moving on to racking selection. If anything, when you're doing a WMS, then you are focused on the detail because you tend to know it's complicated. There's a tendency to think that racking is simple and easy to install and sort of get through it. But again, you still need an eye for detail. Quite often we'll come across people who are doing racking installations where they've not got the right data. Product dimensions, product flow rates, and even more important, product weights. When you need to design the racking and choose your beam strength and all that sort of stuff, quite often it's just not there, and when you ask the question, oh no, we can't get that information. I've never found that to be actually true. As long as you work hard enough and keep asking and keep pushing for it, you can get that information because someone has it. Someone is making that box and that product, and they know exactly what it is, but it's not easy to get hold of typically, and then you need to sense check it and make sure that the data's right. If you don't get that data, by the time you put your racking in, it's not really giving you any benefit at all. Over and above where you may have come from. The other common thing that's overlooked, just building racking for today and not for tomorrow. So not really understanding what the long-term future of the warehouse is and how much flexibility do you need to build into your warehouse to make sure you can cope with next year, the year after, and therefore onwards. And a lot of that comes down to businesses not having clear 3 to 5 year plans. So when you go to the board or the FD or whatever and say, well, what's our 3 to 5 year plan for volume, so I can for sales, so I can convert that to volume and understand what my warehouse needs to do. Quite often you don't get the right information, and you need to start making your own assumptions. Which if it's not available, okay, it's fine. It's not ideal. It's not great, but you can still start making some sensible estimations, and doing that is still better than just building it for today. Another thing we often see with racking installations is just a one-size-fits-all approach. So someone will decide, we're just going to have a wide aisle warehouse or a VNA warehouse, and they'll just fill the space with all that. That sort of approach tends to be because people aren't understanding the various flow rates and the different activities among the product ranges. So before you're doing any project like this, you really need to be understanding, how do we segment our product range? How do we chunk it up? What are our slow movers? What's the best storage method for that? What are our fast movers? How do we build the appropriate racking for those? And what sits in the middle, and how do we set that up correctly? If you then overlay that with the challenges I talked about earlier around picking for retail store replenishment and e-commerce, you've then got quite a complex sort of mishmash of data that you need to pick your way through and work out. Do you have single pick faces for each SKU? Do you have double pick faces? So you have a more condensed e-commerce pick faces compared to sort of wide aisle full pallet picks? And does one replenish the other? And how do you still manage the efficiency through those different processes? The final point I want to mention on racking is, once it's up and you've had it for years, you get very familiar with it. So often I see people then going and adjusting it because it's not quite fit for purpose, and they'll do it themselves. They'll stick someone in a cage on a forklift truck with a roller shrink wrap to knock the pegs out and move it. And I can see people laughing because they've seen doing this too. And just shovel it around, and it'll be fine. And you really need to be making sure that it's still compliant with all the legislation when you do that, and make sure that you're adjusting any weight capacities and all that sort of stuff. Racking's pretty serious stuff when it goes wrong. As you can see, I don't tell you where that picture is, but it becomes a real mess. So the important thing is make sure you are always compliant throughout, and make sure you've got your racking inspections up to date. Process understanding. I'm sure all you understand the processes within your warehouse really well, but how deep is that knowledge within all your team? Quite often, some of the best ideas will be rattling around the heads of your pickers at the moment, and unless you're giving them a method to be able to feed that in somewhere so you can understand it, you won't be able to improve your processes. Quite often, common things that we see, a reluctance to listen to new ideas. Well, you're just a picker, and what would you know about this? I've got my focus. I understand what the process should be, but quite often, if you have that approach, you'll be missing some good ideas. An absence of visiting other businesses' warehouses. So I'm not talking about sneaking into your competitor's warehouse here, but as much as you can, get out and see what other people do. A lot of the benefit that I'm able to bring to our clients is largely because I'm probably in 20, 30 different warehouses a year. These aren't innovative, I shouldn't be telling you this, but these aren't innovative ideas that we have as a company. I see what other people are doing, I look for best practice everywhere I go, and I start sharing that with other people so they can get the benefit. The more you can get out and look out of your warehouse and look at what other people are doing, the better your warehouse will become, because you'll open your eyes to other ways of working. I've talked about periodic reviews of process and fast movers, but you do make sure you stick it in the diary just as a reminder. Make sure you're focused on actually every 6 months we should just do a review of where the fast and slow movers are as a minimum. In terms of sort of less developed warehouses, quite often still see limited working hours, and people say, "Oh, we just can't get any more out." And you say, "Well, when do you work?" "Well, 8 till 5. Right, okay, there are more hours in a day than that, and you need to start expanding the working day. And linking to that is businesses that often work in batches. So in the morning we just do goods in, then we put it away, and then about 4 o'clock we start doing all our picking. Well, you're not getting the most out of your space because you're just moving this little clump of people around the space to work in batches in that. And you start looking at how you can manage the flow across your business and have constant goods in, constant put away, constant picking all the time to get more capacity through your warehouse. And then finally, on this piece around process, tends to be a lack of understanding of what is the critical path of an order or a product through the warehouse. What are the processes it absolutely needs to go through for it to be successful? And if you start using more automation, a more sort of manufacturing term is, what is the rate determining step? So another word is a bottleneck. And actually, what is the maximum we can put through the narrowest bottleneck that we have, whether it's your loading doors, whether it's your number of forklift trucks, whether it's your number of pickers or your marshalling space, whatever that may be, how well do you understand which is your tightest bottleneck in your operation? If you don't know that, you don't know what the maximum capacity of your operation is. So it'd be worth going and investigating so that when you start doing your planning for things like Black Friday or Christmas peak or seasonal peak, depending on your business, you then start understanding what is possible on a day-by-day basis. So you're not making promises that you can't keep. So in terms of a bit of a summary over the nightmares we've just sort of run through, we've got increasing customer demand, creating pressure on supply chain. One-off sales spikes, things like Black Friday, making that even worse. The pressure being put on the warehouses to fulfill customer demand and satisfy them totally. Increasing range of products that's making warehousing space even more precious and tighter to manage. Optimizing layouts, you've got to do, and you've got to be doing that on a constant basis, otherwise you'll be wasting productivity. Understanding when is automation necessary and what is appropriate for your operation. Focus on WMS. Is your current WMS fit for purpose, and is there anything you could do with it more than you're currently doing? Have you spoken to, when was the last time you spoke to your WMS provider to see if you can enhance it in any way, and have you got the latest release with the best functionality? Talked about racking systems, and then finally the focus on processes. So that's a bit of a summary through some of the nightmares. Two things I'm going to move on and talk about for the next sort of 10-15 minutes. One is understanding where you are in your warehouse maturity curve. So what we've got here is a bit of a chart where up the, don't know my left and right, left-hand side is the level of performance from your warehouse, and along the x-axis across the bottom is the level of growth that your business is experiencing. And what we've done is here, we've sort of split it down into 5 stages. So we've got startup, heroics, a managed warehouse, an optimized warehouse, and a differentiated warehouse. And it's quite useful, I think, to just understand whereabouts you are, particularly with the growth of e-commerce, where lots of businesses have now started small, going through to be much more professionalized outfits. It's important to understand where you are and what sort of things you need to have in place so that you don't fall foul of the grey arrow that then starts meaning your performance is dropping off because you've not built your capacity to support the level of growth and volume within your business. So just to give you a bit of a definition, so startup tends to be small scale, very small scale, so micro business, maybe using existing office space, might be even a spare bedroom at this stage as you become a sort of a home eBay trader or whatever. Everything will be manual, everything on spreadsheets, daily trips to the post office to dispatch all your products, and ad hoc returns, or maybe just chuck a tenner at someone and tell them to throw it in the bin. Heroics. So you start, despite operating out of your kitchen, you still manage to see some success, so things start to grow at this point. So you start to see volume growing. You then maybe move into some small premises. What tends to make things work at this stage, because you've not got the management, the processes in place, are staff heroics. So you've got people starting to work 15, 16 hours a day because it's their business and they put all the effort in. And that's really what's making the business work. Little bit of technology, so maybe you might print out an Excel spreadsheet once in a while. You've got loads of wasted time and cost. You've got loads of picking errors and late deliveries, but you sort of smooth that over because it's a nice personal relationship you've got with your customers. Carriers will come and do a collection, but it'll be when they want to do it rather than when you need it to happen. And you're not really getting the benefit of any competitive carrier rates. Managed stage, so you're sort of midway. You recognise the need to invest in a specific fulfillment centre to make sure you're doing it properly and start professionalise your processes. You're starting to use standard operating procedures and document things and make sure things are done in a standardised way. You've got consistent ways of working amongst your team, so everyone's doing things in the same way. You've now got regular but still suboptimal carrier collections, and you're starting to get better rates because your volume's picking up. Optimised. I would like to think that this is where most at least small, medium-sized businesses are achieving. So they've got some sort of WMS that's integrated with a baseline ERP system, so linking into that to make sure we've got transfer of orders. There's some elements of automation of processes implemented, so it might be just a belt or some roller beds or whatever to start helping the flow of product. You start using more MHE at that point, and maybe order pickers rather than just having a counterbalance. You start getting more benchmarks, and you're starting to focus on what does a good process efficiency look like, and how do we get there. You start to focus on cost per unit and have that as a key measure, and start putting some clear KPIs in place. You may be starting to use more than one carrier and segment some of your range so that you're getting the best rate for that size of consignment. And you've started to develop a more professional returns management strategy. Finally, at the top of the graph, differentiated warehouse. So this is where you are if you're starting to lead the way. So you've started getting industry-leading productivities, and you know they're industry-leading because you're going out and visiting other people and talking about what they're achieving. You've got some good level of automation of processes where appropriate, but not automation for automation's sake. You might have multiple sites as you've started to grow and reduce your transport costs, but you started to take stock closer to the customer to be able to deliver it faster. You understand your cost to serve, so you're taking that net product profitability I talked about before and being able to flow it through your operation, so you can actually say, from a net profit point of view, in terms of hands-on operations, that item that I've distributed there, we are making 23p on or whatever, after you've taken all the end-to-end costs into account, and not just averaging it, but understanding how the cube and the weight of that product affects the cost of handling. And you've then got a full spectrum of delivery options, so you might be doing some same day, you might be doing some click and collect through Collect Plus or something like that. You might be doing a good level of highly reliable next day delivery. So hopefully that's you might be able to identify where your business is on that spectrum and what sort of the next things are that you might be able to look at. The last thing I'm going to cover is really sort of the process of how do you manage change within the warehouse and around sort of changing warehouses, processes, and how do you change the equipment. What I've got here, I'm not sure if you can see the text from different distance, some repeater screens on the sides back there. But what this takes you through really is understanding at the top there what your business strategy is, and beneath there what your customer strategy is, and how do you combine those two to develop your supply chain strategy. That really has to be the starting point for anything that you're going to manage in terms of implementing change in your warehouse. If you don't have those things clear, you should be going to your MD and saying, what are we doing in this area? What is the promise that we're making to our customers? Because if you can't tell me that clearly, how do you expect me to run a warehouse that delivers it? So it's having that clearly defined to understand what are we saying we're going to do to the customer, or what are we going to give to the customer, and therefore I can then build a warehouse and a supply chain and a carrier system or whatever that can deliver that. Because there's no point promising gold-plated service if your warehouse is held together with sellotape and string. You need to have the appropriate levels of investment to be able to fulfill whatever you're promising. Next stage is the high-level solution design. So once you understand the strategy you're trying to deliver, what's the solution you're trying to put in place? Then you probably need to take it to business case to get that signed off. And I'll go through each one of these in a bit more detail. Then you need your property or your process or whatever the change solution is. You need to start developing that once you've got your business case signed off. Then you're into detailed site design and procurement. Then you're into on-site site development, so the actual work going on the shop floor and fit out or whatever, and then go live. This is a process we use when we're managing projects, either for warehouse new builds, so we started from bare patch of grass through to first goods in, and it's also we sort of chop and change it a little bit, but we also do it for either warehouse moves and warehouse sort of equipment installations where you've got a significant change going on. So first of all, I think I've covered this mainly, but what's the business trying to achieve? What's the customer proposition? How aligned is logistics to delivering that proposition? And how do we combine the business and the customer strategy to define the supply chain strategy? And how do you document that and share it around your business so people understand what it is that you're trying to achieve and what your objective is in the warehouse? If everyone doesn't know that, how can you expect them to do a good job on their day-to-day basis if they don't really know what a good job looks like? So the high-level solution design, that tends to be an early tentative design with a number of options. So you might have had a few early meetings with some potential providers. That's enabled you to outline the most likely sort of 4 or 5 options that you might want to take forward and develop a business case. You're starting to get some high-level cost estimates for what it is that you're going to put in place. Because of that, you've also been talking to providers, and they're starting to give you an indication of what the benefits of their kit might be or what this change might be. So you've started to develop the benefits case. You need to identify the risks. Quite often that's omitted at this stage, and you still only start thinking about that once you've decided to go ahead with something. Think about the risks right at the start. Okay, so that's sort of the high-level bit at this stage. So all very tentative, but all sketched out in pencil and something that you can start shaping and playing around with. Next stage really is that robust business case, and that's really to build consensus within the business. The last thing you want to be doing is going somewhere and presenting something nice and shiny, and everyone saying, yeah, we'll go ahead with that, and nudging each other, going, over my dead body, is that going to work? And we'll see if he's still in the job in 12 months' time. You want to build that sort of shared responsibility and shared ownership for what's going to be put in place. So my guidance would be, make sure your financial benefits are conservative. It's far better to underpromise at this stage and over-deliver in 2 years' time once it's implemented than it is to try and make a benefits case that's bigger than you think it might be just in order to get sign-off. Put together a sensible project timeline. Forget what everyone else is saying around when it needs to be done by. Work it out from how long you need to do it properly, and then look at how that can be other people's objectives can fit to that. The last thing you want to do is tie yourself up in knots and try and deliver something in too short a time frame for you to be able to comfortably deliver it in a successful way. Make sure you're comfortable with the business case. I've presented business cases with various sort of heads of logistics and things at board meetings, and the question I always asked sort of the week before we got there to the business case, and how comfortable are you in presenting this and being comfortable that no matter what question someone asks you, you're happy with the answer and you're not trying to wing it in some way. If you're not entirely comfortable with it, it's not right. The last thing you want to be doing is hoisting yourself and sticking your head above the parapet and trying to wing it and get sign-off for something you think, well, yeah, it might work, it might not. You've got to be very honest and truthful with everyone to make sure that they buy into that business case as well. Similarly, be prepared to revise it. Quite often when you go and you're looking for big levels of CapEx, everyone suddenly becomes a warehouse expert, a warehouse expert around the board table and starts throwing in what you will know as ridiculous suggestions because they heard someone talking on the golf course about how you should run warehouses. I've heard it all. But you do still need to respond to those sort of queries and those challenges appropriately. So be prepared to then go back in another month's time, having answered the challenges that you've been given, as ridiculous as they might be sensible ones as well, and revise that and take it back and get proper sign-off. Don't try and dodge that. It's an important process that everyone buys into it. Next stage, once you've got sign-off, is then really start the project and evaluate the options and refine the solution down to understanding really precisely what you know you're going to do within the scope of the business case. Create an implementation plan. Make sure you've got that project plan. You can still change it at any point in time, but at least you've got a plan and you know what you should be doing to drive the pace of the project each week, what tasks should be done, and you'll know whether you're falling behind or gaining on that plan. Involve as many people as you can, internal and external. Particularly if you think about some of the partners here at the WTG and other sort of providers that you'll deal with, there's a lot of knowledge and expertise in that body of people. They won't always try and sell you something if you invite them to a meeting. You can just get some good knowledge off them and get their expertise because they'll have seen things in other places. So it's important to get their involvement and get their knowledge because they'll have done this 6, 7, 10, 20, 30 times. You might only be doing it 2 or 3 times in your career of something significant like putting a WMS in perhaps. So use the expertise and talk to a lot of people about what you're doing. You'll be amazed where you get additional knowledge from. Refining your solution requires you to now start defining the precise requirements. So you're taking it from those 4 or 5 options you had at business case level and starting to really define it in terms of precisely what it is that you're going to put in place. Through that, you also select the appropriate partners and providers that you're going to use. and then you can really start confirming your costs and managing budgets, and you've probably got some sort of budget procedure where you need to go back and feed that into whichever body signed off the project. Then sort of getting into what I'll call the sort of the nearer to the startup point of view, you've got that detailed process design. So really into the nitty gritty, what are we going to implement? If it's a WMS, how do we map absolutely every process that we're going to undertake? Not just the main ones like picking, but what about when someone delivers something that's non-conforming? Don't just forget about it, because that's the stuff that will start off in a small pallet in a corner, and then by the end of your first week, you've got 20 pallets and you're deciding to stick it on a trailer across the yard because you haven't quite got time to deal with it that week because you've still got the teething problems to deal with. Make sure you've mapped all those problems and all those sort of once in a month type occasions to be able to handle those appropriately. Don't think you'll get by once you go live. You generally won't. Make sure there's formal ownership and a sign-off process for any decisions and processes that you're mapping. Be clear. Quite often we'll sit with clients and say, right, so who's the owner of this system? Because you'll generally have this nice collective responsibility of 4 or 5 people sat in a room, and they'll all sort of go very silent at that point and start looking at each other thinking, yeah, I don't really want to own this, because if it goes wrong, that's going to be my head on the block. But really, you should be pleased to own a project like this, and if you don't feel comfortable to own it at that point, there's something wrong with the project. So you make sure that you've got that clear ownership, and if you've got that ownership, you've then got the control over it to make sure it can be successful. And formalise the sign-off process. Nothing focuses the mind by asking someone to sign their name on a bottom of a document that defines a process, rather than sort of just passing it through a meeting and vague nodding from around the table, which sort of generally means I've not really looked at it, I've not had time, but I'm sure it'll be fine if you've looked at it, Dave. Finally, then going into the procurement. So what are you actually paying for that solution? Make sure you do some cost benchmarking, do reference checking. I'm always astounded at how few people pay large amounts of money for big pieces of kit or systems and don't go and visit 2 or 3 client sites where that's been implemented before to understand what lessons have they learned, how well did it work, what was the project go live like, what was the provider like to work with, what teething problems did you have, what advice would you have for me in our project. There's masses to be learned from those reference check visits. I know everyone will think you're going out on a jolly for a day and a trip around the UK, but really you'll get a ton of value from it, and it's absolutely essential in any big change project. And then finally on the detailed design, really a coordinated installation program. So make sure that your project plan now is expanding to include other organizations and how the installation will take place and how it will all fit together. Make sure that you're using all that expertise and build in some fire breaks in that project to make sure you can cope with delays that don't derail everything. Moving on to the site development, sort of on-site work and fit out. The essential bit for this is close project management of everything. You need to be all over it every day. If you've got a busy day job, you need to get someone else in, like us, to go and run that for you so that you're not distracted and you can still focus on doing the day job, and that doesn't all fall to pieces while you're building your nice, shiny new operation. So within that close project management, make sure you've got some really clear milestones. Are there some go, no-go decision points where actually, if we're not at this stage and we've not signed all these things off, we don't go any further on anything else until that bit's complete. Try and identify those within your project plan before you start, and then stick to them. Don't be swayed by the desire to go live on a particular date. Contingency planning, I've talked about fire breaks a moment ago. Daily installation planning. The most complex projects like this start using maps of each day. So you get a map of the warehouse as it stands, and each day you overlay on that either through post-it notes or stickers exactly what is going on that day at each point of the time or each shift in each area. So the shift manager's got a clear idea if you're doing a change in a live warehouse, and he can go and say, what's the installation plan for today or the project plan for today. The construction guys or your CDM coordinator or whatever can also be able to communicate through that. It works for the most complex ones, so there's no reason not to use it in simplistic implementations as well. It's some best practice that you can use really to make sure everyone's got a good detailed understanding of what's going on a day-to-day basis. Then finally, moving on to sort of go-live process. The key here for me is test, and test some more. You can't under-test it. A number of projects I see where they say, oh, well, yeah, we get to the last week of the project, then we're going to do 1 week of user acceptance testing, training, and go-live. all in 5 days. And David from Chess is laughing there because most of his... No, I won't say that. So you just can't do it. You need a good 3 or 4 weeks of user acceptance testing because you will come across things that don't work. Don't expect user acceptance testing to be a plain sailing event. You need to be getting your user to test every single process in that system and make sure it doesn't work. And not, oh yeah, there's a bit of a problem, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Because they don't tend to be fine. Small things tend to, molehills tend to turn into mountains very quickly on go-lives of new systems and new implementations. So focus on that detail. Expect things to go wrong in your user acceptance testing, and don't try and think that user acceptance testing is the same as training people into using the system. The two need to be two very distinct, separate things. Within that testing, you need to make sure that you've got some good, clear test scripts. So early on in the project, start mapping every single thing that you do. Start talking to your admin teams and things like that. Tell them to start drafting lists of when unusual things happen so you can build that into your test scripts. You need to be testing all the possible eventualities that your business is currently dealing with to make sure it works in the new world. Secondly, don't force it to work. If it's not working, stop, fix it, and then move on. Don't try and brush anything under the carpet. So key to this is thoroughness and rigor throughout. Make sure you go live, if at all possible, is a nice soft start with low volume, just a couple of orders, walk through the process, observe it closely, what needs to happen, is there any problems, what do we need to do, and then resolve any teething issues at that stage, and then slowly ramp up the volume after that. So make sure you take it very steady. Big bangs terrify me. I've been in too many places where they go, well, we haven't got any option, we've just got to switch it on. And they don't work. Virtually 99% they will not work. You'll have big problems and you'll be into sort of critical situation management rather than managing a sensible go live. And it's not really where you want to be, because at the end of the day you'd like to be going home and putting your feet up, not sort of just nipping home for a quick bit of shut eye and then popping back and only getting 4 hours at home, which I've seen many people do on these sorts of projects. So as a bit of a summary, I think probably thoroughness and rigor are the key things you probably got from me if I've not bored you to tears with going through too much of the detail of this process. For us it works. We're yet to have, touch wood, is this wood? Yeah. Touch wood, we're yet to have a project go wrong when we followed this methodology, and I think there's some good learning there that I'm happy to share with you all to help you manage your projects in the best way. So a bit of a recap. So we've covered sort of the typical problems that we're seeing on a regular basis where we go around different places, the increasing pressures you're getting from e-com and retail conflicts, customers wanting more customization. Talked through a bit of the maturity curve of where your operations are and what sort of things you might want to be looking at to move on to the next step. And then final bit was just really running through sort of a typical project methodology that you might want to use and some tips to follow when you're doing your implementation. So that's it. In the words of Nick Ross, situations like this are quite rare, so don't have nightmares about your warehouse. And thank you very much for listening.